Hello, and welcome to Expose Yourself to Art, the weekly show where we talk with artists and explore the creative process. My name is Linda Scheller. I'm your host today. David Schrader will be with you next week. Today, we're going to be watching a video that Linda Knoll and I filmed of Henrietta Sparkman, a local painter. And you're going to really enjoy this because we were able to go into her studio and she talks about her art there. So enjoy the tour of Henrietta Sparkman's studio. Welcome to Expose Yourself to Art, the show where we talk to artists about their creative process, the arts community, and what's happening here in Stanislaus County. Today our guest is Henrietta Sparkman, an artist, art teacher, and a community activist in the arts. Welcome, Henrietta.
Thank you, Linda.
Let's go back to your We seem to be having technical difficulties, and Linda Knoll will be working on it. Let me just say, I've known Henrietta for 4 or 5 years now, and I really admire her versatility, her ideas, and what she's done here in the community regarding the arts. If you know of anyone who you think would be appropriate or interesting for us to feature, please write their name in the comments section. Welcome to Expose Yourself to Art, the show where we talk to artists about their creative process, the arts community, and what's happening here in Stanislaus County. Today our guest is Henrietta Sparkman, an artist, art teacher, and a community activist in the arts. Welcome, Henrietta.
Thank you, Linda.
Let's go back to your childhood. At what point did you know that you were an artist, or at least keenly interested in art?
Probably very early on. As a child, we lived on a farm, and friends of my parents brought art supplies, and that was very exciting. And it was a nice change from chores and schoolwork and a whole different direction to explore.
Nice. You lived on a farm. Was there surrounding countryside you were able to explore too?
Oh, definitely. Beautiful countryside and a nice way to grow up.
Oh, I bet. And did that influence your love of nature then?
Oh, absolutely. Really have enjoyed nature all my life, exploring, hiking, kayaking, mountain climbing, plein air painting, etc. So it's led to different avenues.
Wonderful. Was the rest of your family artistic?
They were, all to different degrees. My sister and brother were very musically inclined. My mother was a textile artist, and my father was also very good with his hands and making things and building furniture, etc.
And your parents were encouraging of your interests in the arts?
Oh, of course. My brother took home ec in junior high, and I took drafting classes in high school. I was the only girl in drafting, so it was a good experience.
Wow.
To be exposed to different things.
Wonderful. So did you then study art in college?
I did, at Modesto Junior College, and also went away to college as well. And then also became a teacher to teach art because I felt very compelled that it was something that I felt that more people should be aware of and have an opportunity to explore.
I agree. Who were some of the instructors or artists that strongly influenced your development?
One was Darwin Musselman, a realist painter, and also Judy Chicago.
Oh.
Yeah, so that was before she started Woman House in Southern California. So that was coming from a very quiet environment and traditional. It was quite an experience to be exposed to these other possibilities of expression.
I bet.
Yeah.
It was a shock, huh?
It was, yes, it was a bit of a culture shock, but it was a good thing to be aware of and to look at different ways to explore your art and how others went about preparing themselves for what they were doing with their art.
What did you mainly learn from Judy Chicago?
It was about speaking up as a woman, and I think that was very important. With Mr. Musselman, he was a phenomenal artist, very completely opposite, two extremes. And that's the other thing about an education and taking classes beyond your college education or graduate school, etc., is being exposed to different things and allowing yourself to relate those to the world you live in.
As a woman in the arts, have you encountered impediments and challenges that you feel are worth speaking about?
Yes, I think so. I did a series about life as a woman and exploring health issues and taking it from there into other avenues. One sculpture was a piece where one breast was an ear and the other breast was just a breast, and the title was "Are You Listening?" Because because sometimes people look at you in different ways, and so that was my response to how women are taken for their physical appearance rather than for their mental capabilities and their spiritual background.
That's great. I love that statement. So then you went into arts education, right?
Mm-hmm.
And where did you teach?
I taught mostly at Davis High School, and then I did some guest lecturing at Stanislaus State University, and so that was always a pleasant change, not having to worry about tardies and discipline and just lecturing about your art. Mm-hmm.
What courses did you teach at the college?
Oh, I was lecturing about the work I had done.
I see.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And were you also working with the county at some point?
There is Amy Baltina at Stanislaus County Office of Education has a arts leadership team that I have been involved with. So, and I think that is very important. And she also sponsors art shows for students, as well as music and performance art. And she's really expanded and done a very nice job.
In the past, 3-4 decades, can you speak about the change in art education and opportunities for young people that you have noticed?
There's been a lot of change. We've gone from the framework with standards for students and what they need to learn. And I've seen a change towards more of a mix and not so much focus on the arts, but integrating it into other subject areas more so than perhaps in the past. I think with the pandemic, we realized the importance of the arts for the students to express themselves, having been cut off socially, and remote learning has made a huge difference in their lives. And I think there's programs like that have become more important for our youth.
Oh, good. I'm so glad they've had that outlet and that people are encouraging them. Good. So you've entered many, many shows and had exhibitions. Could you talk a little bit about some of them?
I belong to a number of art associations and have exhibited in a number of places, from San Francisco to Monterey to Salinas to Pacific Grove to the Carnegie and Turlock, amongst others, a lot of different places. It depends too on the theme of the show and the direction, and it's always interesting as an artist because we typically work in isolation for the most part, and so to see others work gives us another avenue to communicate and explore, learn from each other. So it's a good opportunity, and it's not something as artists we have a tendency to be solitary, but it's important also to speak out about different issues and challenges and problems facing us today, whether it be the environment or the pandemic or healthcare, whatever it might be, or nature, the environment. Those are all things I think as we exhibit, it gives the public, we're also educating the public and creating awareness, but allow them to see different points of view. Especially in today's diverse state of mind that we're in, I think we have to allow ourselves not to be set in our own ways, but to learn from others and grow from that.
Well, that's great. Maybe you could talk a little bit about some of your art. For example, behind us, there are beautiful paintings of Yosemite.
Yes, there's a group of us about once a year up until before the pandemic, we would go to Yosemite for a week and paint. And so paint all day long, and then in the evenings have critiques of our work. So these are some that explore different directions, whether the atmosphere or the light or the state of mind. And one of the things is I always go in different directions based a lot on mood and what I see and what I feel. And so the smaller one here is more about how the textures. I used to mountain climb, and so this is one about the different textures and finding those holes to pull yourself up on. And it also makes a statement about our strength as a person to challenge ourselves, and also as an artist. So Yosemite is one of those special sanctuaries that is different than living in the city, that gives us more of an appreciation for our nature and the environment.
What's marvelous is the way the light is falling on that one. I can see the texture. Some of it kind of shines. It looks like granite with that rough quality. And those are beautiful.
Thank you.
Yes, maybe you could elaborate. I know we've spoken before about light and shadow and how that affects color. And as a verbal artist, I haven't thought about that as much. And maybe some of the people watching this show could learn from you, as to when during the day you're painting and how the light changes and how does that affect your process and the shadows.
It completely affects whatever you're painting. If you're, especially in plein air painting, when you're out in nature, and it's also something that photographers do. They'll often set up a camera and take pictures at different times of the day, 9 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock. But as an artist, one of the things that forces you, especially for plein air painting, to think quickly on your feet, because you're recording the atmospheric conditions, you're recording you've got a format of what you're drawing that makes a good composition. You're trying to explore not only your natural surroundings, but capturing the essence of what you see and how you see it, which can be like a writer in one way, or a musician, because there's different elements that make up these parts that make it whole.
Are you ever out in nature and despite what the colors are there in your surroundings, you feel like, well, instead of green, I want this to be purple, or this feels bright pink. Oh, that must be fun.
Yeah, like over there, that is done more in oranges, when naturally the rocks would be, granite would be gray. Yes. And so I made them orange and violet, just to be something, because of the light and the way it was hitting in the late afternoon or the early morning, because those were both done at different times of day. So it gives a chance to see it in a different way with different colors. It's just like our moods and how we feel. You record that to show that it can be seen in different ways. Life isn't always black and white, but we're looking at how we show those feelings, what we see, how we translate the visual into a two-dimensional painting.
Oh, Henrietta, please talk about this piece.
Speaking of nature and Yosemite, this was titled Yosemite Bus Stop. And there was an area where buses could pull off in cars, and there were these two birds, which created interest, and I took a picture and then worked from the picture to show this scene. It's titled Yosemite Bus Stop, relating to that, of course, but it's done in pastel, a different medium, which is a very finely ground pigment that's held together in a stick, and it's building up layers, which is different than painting, where you're mixing colors, and this is building up layers of colors.
So that the lower layers influence the layers on top of them?
And you can allow some of the lower layers to show through and build up areas where you would like to add the contrast or details.
That's so beautiful.
Oh,
So
thank you.
soft.
Thank you. That's the nice thing about pastel. It can be very soft and it can create a different effect. It's like language. Every medium speaks its own language. This was a print, and it was done from a watercolor mixed media piece where the map was on the bottom and then painted on top on canvas. And so what I did was build up layers. It was actually an experiment working with an iridescent medium because I wanted to get the feel of the skin of the fish and that glow, which I was able to capture. Haven't tried it since doing that, but it was a fun experiment to see what would work and what wouldn't work. So, and then I thought the burlwood framing can be important too, to reinforce the natural effect with the burlwood frame. This particular piece is from Point Arena up on the northern coast, and it was a matter of showing the danger of nature besides the beauty of nature and the contrast. It was also used in the book that was done for the 150th anniversary of Modesto. Ken White and the McHenry Museum used it as a fundraiser for the book, and each chapter featured a different artist's work that would fit into that particular chapter.
It does look dangerous.
Yes, it was one of those you didn't want to get too close to the edge.
No, I already feel like I am too close. And then the water below looks so cold, and that's very powerful.
Thank you.
And I love the fish. It really is iridescent. The scales just seem to gleam.
It was an iridescent medium that I mixed in with a watercolor to get that effect.
Oh wow! What do you mean by an iridescent medium?
And it had a little glow to it when you mixed it with other things.
And you just buy a tube or
It was
bottle
a bottle of iridescent medium for watercolors, so I mixed it with the watercolors.
Wow!
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't even know that existed. That's fascinating. Okay, go. Please tell us about this, Henrietta. It's gorgeous.
Thank you. This is up in the Mendocino area, and it's on the Big River, which goes down into the Pacific. And it's a gorgeous area to sit down on the dock where they rent the kayaks and boats, and just to sit and paint with oil pastels. Oil pastels are different than the soft pastels of the Yosemite bus stop. And this, I wanted to show just the beauty of the nature in this one, and how a different view from the harshness of the Pacific Ocean at Point Lobos, and to show another view of nature in a way that adds softness and color and all of these different ingredients to make it a peaceful place for solitude and relaxation and meditation.
So soothing. Lovely.
It's different than this other one, which is titled Nature's Catwalk, and this is over on the Central Coast, and it is one that shows how nature can change and modify the landscape. And what has happened here is it's formed, I just thought it looked like a catwalk, being careful to walk out and observe the water below and the tide and the foam from the changes in the water and the direction of the water and the waves, to show how we can see the changes over time of the natural landscape.
Lovely.
Oil pastels is again building up layers, but this time with oil pastels, it's based with oil, and it's very much like a oil painting.
Do you do your own matting as well?
Sometimes I do, but these were matted by and framed by a former student, Carl Anderson, who does a beautiful job. I work with different framers, and sometimes I frame my own work. It just depends on what I have in hand. And the ones you see behind, while we're talking about nature, this particular one, the last light, it was late in the evening in Yosemite, and the light changed the detail as it came over the mountaintops to show how much light can change the scene. And it just, the top snag, the sunlight, and as it begins to fall, it caresses the mountaintops and the shadows descend. It's like the rocks just glow at the top, and then it's like day, starting from early morning, late to night. It's just another metaphor to show. And then this particular one is also Yosemite, and it was on the Merced River in a very peaceful spot, and the rock there is known as Potato Rock. And so it has a tendency to just stand out. So the composition presented a challenge to have it so it would balance out and your eye didn't always go to the potato rock. But it was a nice quiet place, and it's nice to find solitude as you paint and have that feeling to share with someone else of the solitude.
Yes, it's lovely. Is it the sort of gold color underneath that, I don't know if it's a pine or a redwood on the opposite bank? Is that part of the reason my eye is drawn up that way?
To help balance away, and then to get your eye to come back around.
I see.
So you stay, and this is one that I frame myself because as a member of MB Papa, they like a traditional frame. So it also depends on the show. Sometimes it doesn't matter, but sometimes it does.
It's so nice to be here in your studio, Henrietta, and be able to see all this art and where you create. It's just great.
Thank you.
Please tell us about these two.
As we were speaking about nature, this particular one was done in Mendocino, and typically each year I go up for the Mendocino Plein Air Festival, which is a great festival and beautiful location and paint. And this was done sitting out on the headlands and painting. I really liked the textures and the structure of the cliffs, and they presented a challenge to paint those in a way that would create interest. And then the sky was such that the lighting was so beautiful. It was one of those days the fog had lifted, the afternoon was nice and sunny, and composing it to keep and bring together both the cliffs and the sky to unify it, and then to be able to create the textures by building up layers. This is done in acrylic paint. And so each composition requires a different focus when you're plein air painting. And as I mentioned before, you have to think quickly on your feet, especially with acrylics, because they dry very quickly. And to get that feeling of nature's forces and how over time the cliffs had become more rugged and a more dangerous terrain, but then to show it in a very peaceful way, and an afternoon where there was sunshine rather than fog, there wasn't rain, it was just a pleasant afternoon out on the headlands. This particular piece that you're holding, Linda, is over at Point Lobos, which is another beautiful area on the Central Coast, and the waves, the slashing up against the rocks was just a very melodic, lulling feeling. And to be able to create that and show the rocks with more depth and more contrast gives a different feeling than the Mendocino coast. There were a lot of greenery around. It was a nice afternoon, and the feeling of the rocks, not just because they're gray, just another case of how you use color, and using purple and ochres and other colors other than the granite, grays and darks, but to show different colors to give them a little more warmth. I thought gave such a beautiful place that has also a harsh reality when the elements change, just to bring out their beauty, and was the intent in this plein air painting.
The colors are lovely.
Thank you.
So here we have some abstracts. How do you even kind of conceive of an abstract? How does that get started?
To me, abstraction is reality turned inside out. And when you do that, it leaves all kinds of possibility. It's also another form of conversation. It takes it to a different level because you're not dealing in reality because you've turned it inside out. So in these two pieces, which are done in oil and wax medium, they're built up in layers. This one is titled Daydreams, and this one is titled Night Dreams. And daydreams, it's the truth of reality that mixes the past and it shakes the normal into an unknown future. Because when we daydream, we're taking ourselves into another direction, and we allow ourselves to look at what could be possible in our subconscious, and to explore our thoughts and how some thoughts are best as reality while others could be as fear. And then to tie that in, we have night dreams, and with night dreams, that takes us to another reality, and it's unresolved issues that turn what we see in life into fiction in our fears, and then how our hemisphere, the mind, travels into uncharted territory. So, and that's why they are as a series as daydreams and night dreams.
That's profound. Do your dreams ever inspire you to create something specific?
Yeah.
Do you keep a dream journal, perchance?
I don't, but they roll around in your head until it's like words, until it's put down on paper like poetry or writing. It's like you're pulled, and it's until you get that done, you just are frustrated until you get it down.
It's like you're haunted.
Yeah, or you'll write notes or sketches until you put it down on paper.
So please tell us about these two.
These are monoprints, and monoprints is a one of a kind print, and they're statements about our culture, our history, our humanity. This one is titled In the Shadow of Time, and it is about how we in the past and our different cultures have worshipped different things, explored different things. For instance, how people, different tribes in New Zealand and Australia and Hawaii and in other places in Mexico and other countries, how they had their own culture and how they led their lives. And then we think about what's going on in today's world, and we see that we're no different. We think we're more sophisticated, but maybe they had it right. So it begs of that question. And in this particular one, one fact that really struck with me was reading about the state fair in early years and how food grew so much bigger and larger, was of more quality. And when we have homogenized farming and how we grow our crops, we have changed that dynamic, which affects our health and our well-being. So it's about how we have changed in our views of how we nurture our bodies.
Were you sketching as these thoughts were rolling around, and then you ended up with shapes and images? And
sometimes it just happens, it comes before you. Sometimes you have an idea starting out. So it will vary depending on the piece and the medium. Mediums are like language. In some mediums, we can express things in a more easy to understand language, whereas it might not work as well in another medium. So it's like the difference between French and Spanish and Latin and other languages. It's the same in art with art mediums.
Do you create every day?
No, I wish there's another reality. It's called domestic life.
The daydream.
Yeah, that's the daydream.
Well, you seem very, very prolific, and you have such wonderful ideas.
Well, thank you. It was, I think for an artist, one lifetime's not enough, and there's so many things you want to explore.
Yeah. And then we have a couple abstracts here too. May I hold this up and you can talk about it?
This one is called Ties That Bind, and it's about losing someone. And life seems abstract at times. The loss of a friend or relative is a reminder that in life and death, we look and are tied to each other's history. And so it's about loss and memory, and how we are inclined to mourn that, but then we have our memories that help us heal.
And the medium?
The medium, this is a mix. It's similar to monoprint, but it's working with a lot of different just found objects and inking them with ink and printing them and using a brayer and rolling it out and just building up layers to get that composition that fulfills the idea.
What is a brayer?
A brayer is a roller with a handle that you roll out paint. Yeah.
So do you ink the object and then press it on?
And build it up in layers, yes.
Gosh.
So, but it's more a combination of mixed media and then also scratching through, giving a sgraffito effect and using different found objects that might have holes in them and inking over that. So you can do different things with it. Yeah, that's the fun part of abstraction.
That's very
and
haunting.
hopefully, and the title becomes important because it gives a hint into what the artist is saying.
Ties that bind. Very nice.
Thank you.
This looks like it would be heavy.
It's actually pretty light. This one's titled Yosemite, and it was about a health concern. And I asked for the x-ray from the doctor who gave it to me, and then I used it as a starting point for a painting. There's a bit of iridescence in here. We were talking about iridescence earlier. I had taken modeling paste and put on the canvas, and that stiffened it, and so started layering colors by watering down acrylics and building up layers. So that x-ray then turned into an abstracted landscape. So by building up layers and layers and layers and adding different things to the watered down acrylics, because what happened is the modeling paste then soaked it up, which gives a different effect than if you were working with just straight acrylic paint or regular paint. Again, another experiment to see how different things would come together and hold, and just to work on the composition.
There's a lot of courage in your art because you are experimenting and you have no idea if your vision is going to come out the way you want it, or if you have to go back to the drawing board and start and try something new.
And that's why artists will have stacks of things that aren't finished because it didn't go where you wanted it to go. In figurative art, this piece was done working from a live model. And the model will only be able to sit still for so long. In this case, luckily, she was sitting down. Typically, with a lot of figurative work, they become very realistic, and they're beautiful women. And someone pointed out to me the reason they like this piece was because it was presented as a real person with the belly and the not sitting up straight, just in a relaxed pose. The proportions aren't correct, but just a feeling of painting in a way like plein air painting, painting very quickly, trying to get all of the elements in. And this is one where after having a mammogram, I had a couple of little places where they were checking. So I took those off and I came in and I put them on the painting. And then when it was at the gallery, the docent called me and said, somebody stuck something on your painting. Well, I was trying to give it a three-dimensional effect. So it's interesting how people respond to something slightly different. So it's a different way of working when you're working from a model, a live model. So again, like plein air painting, you have to work quickly to catch the essence of the figure. And this particular one, it was a working from a photograph to present a different version and a different occasion for this particular model. And the challenge was the shadows, the light and the shadow of the hat, to create interest in the composition. And not so much about the body, but the different ways that light and shadow play and interplay in a painting. And this is another case of framing a work where it's very important to bring out what you're trying to express with the mat and the frame so that the art becomes the most important element. In the 70s, I did photography work. And in this particular case, it was at Santa Cruz, and there was this old man on the carousel, which you don't normally expect to find. And then the little boy was just so curious about this old man on the carousel. I just happened to be in the right spot at the right time. And I had my father's Zeiss Icon camera, which was a great camera, an older camera, but it took such wonderful pictures, and I processed it myself. Of course, this was in the days before digital work, but in this particular moment, it was just catching that reaction of the child and them being in this happy place to explore, and the contrast of age.
Nice.
And the piece behind you, this was also working from a live model. And in this case, I wanted the model to be slightly abstracted compared to this one, which was more realistic. And so she's just relaxing on the couch and just taking a little nap as I painted her. And this was done with oil paints, in contrast to the effect of using photography versus oil paint, acrylic paint, and exploring different mediums to get a different effect. So medium can make a difference in how you proceed, whether it be realistic or if it's slightly abstracted. So it just depends on what you're feeling at the time you're working, your objective, what your goal is in your presentation. And this piece is titled Yesteryear, and it's a self-portrait of myself with mixed media. It's done on canvas, and it has a underpainting and then gilt, gold leaf put over it, and then that had a layer after it dried of a little bit of a resin type material. And then after that completely dried, I used asphaltum tar to paint myself. And I used it in a different way than traditionally done. Most people don't use asphaltum, but I found that by thinning it down, it was like working almost like charcoal. But I wanted certain things to glow through. So by experimenting with different mediums, it's again like language. It's how you get that vision of what you want to accomplish. And so it's probably a good combination. It worked out well. It's held up well. I wasn't sure how it was going to work, but I had used asphaltum before, and have found it can take me in different directions with what I'm trying to express.
How do you discover these different materials?
Well, sometimes you have things on hand. What can I do with this?
Okay.
Yeah.
But do other artists say, oh, I just used asphaltum. Have you ever tried that? Or
not many people use asphaltum.
I've never heard of it.
Yeah. But it takes a long time to dry. And sometimes I've even put asphaltum in a squeeze bottle and sketched out a Yosemite piece I did. I sketched it out with asphaltum. I had to let it dry for a few months, and then I came back and painted on top of that and let the asphaltum show through. So the asphaltum became the contour lines of the painting.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Go. So what have we here?
This is a sculpture that was a series that I did of over 20. It was a series, and it's a combination of a poem that I had written incised into the clay before it was fired, and the poem continues on the back side of the sculpture. Oh. And so this is one that's assembled from different bits and pieces, and there I got the bottom from antique store downtown. It was the mother of one of my former students gave it to me, and then this was a long ornament. So I welded the bottom and then took and put this, it needed a topper. The idea was to have it look like a dressmaker's model, because the whole series that I did of sculptures was about women and how they go through life. And this particular one was about a relationship, the poem, and it was done with a white clay. And then after it was fired, I used a stain and refired it again. And then it is all wired together. And then I knew I needed a particular type of fabric for this dressmaker's model with the poem. And so I went into a fabric store, and the fabric was way up on the top, wrapped around, and I said, that's the fabric I need. Yeah. Anyway, it suited the piece. It had to be a muted tone to work with the piece. The others in this piece talked about different things that happened, not only from a woman's point of view, but what was going on in the world at the time, all done with the same, this was a mold of my body. Mm-hmm. And so I used that to form the clay around. And it went from a health concern all the way to death. And then one of the pieces was completely in white. It was titled Guest of My Body, and it was about a near-death experience. Other pieces were about women as quilt makers, so there were all these little pieces of clay put together as the quilting bee, as another facet of women's life. Another one was about mindfulness and how our society differs from Eastern thought as opposed to Western thought. So I explored different avenues of from a woman's perspective.
Oh, fascinating. Mm-hmm. What happened to the other 19?
They're up in the attic.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm glad you have an attic.
Yeah, it's very important to have an attic to store things. So artists have a tendency to collect different things, but it's, you know, when you have 20 pieces, actually there were a little more than 20, you just don't have enough room to hang them all. And so Tizia, Good, Barnett, and myself were asked to show our work. They were familiar with, I was working at Stan State at the time, and they asked us to have our work in conjunction with the Vagina Monologues that was being presented in the theater.
Perfect.
Yeah, so everybody was fascinated with both of our works because Tizia focused on another aspect of a woman's life, and so we were a good match. So it was fun to do that together.
I would love to see all 20 out somewhere exhibited.
Yeah, at some point it would be nice to have them exhibited again.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Do you, can you read what is inscribed on the front here?
I don't think it's going to show up very well in the light, but anyway, I had wanted to put it in a journal that was being published by a poetry group, and I said, well, it's on clay and not on paper, and they were a little taken back, but anyway, our Pin Women group, we did an ekphrastic, and so I did exhibit it at the Carnegie for the ekphrastic where artists and writers work together.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Sleeping with Disappointment. Is that what that says?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, that's very thought-provoking.
Well, thank you.
I love the scope of your ideas. You have such a wide-ranging mind. I think that's marvelous.
You know, I don't always work in just one direction like some artists do. And I think part of that was because I taught different things, and all of that came into play with my own artwork to be able to work and teach with different mediums. So it all comes together in different ways.
Great. Thank you so much, Henrietta.
You're welcome.
Our guest today on Expose Yourself to Art has been Henrietta Sparkman, who, I would like to add, has provided my cover art for my forthcoming book, her beautiful monotype, Convected. Could you just briefly describe how you made that and what you were thinking?
It was made from found objects, cut up pieces of paper, scraps, and then building up layers of color. And working, as you're building up layers of color, different things start to happen. And you have to think about, how am I going to, where is this going? How am I going to handle this? When is it finished? When do I need to leave it alone? So those were some of the things. And then working with a color scheme that would work well together and add to what was going on, the movement in the painting or in the print. Because as we've mentioned before, the monotype is a one-of-a-kind print. And in that case, it was all done with found objects and a selected group of colors to pull that together. And the convected came from the different angular movements that were going on within the piece, within the composition.
Well, it is absolutely gorgeous. It's hanging in my house because I purchased it, and it's perfect for my book because the title is Wind and Children. And the motion, the angularity, just the colors, it was absolutely ideal. The moment my manuscript was accepted, I thought, oh, this has to be the cover. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for choosing it. I appreciate it very much.
Oh, thanks. I always enjoy talking with Henrietta. That was a really interesting tour. And we have an image of Convected. Here's the cover of my book. And so you can see Convected. It's a portion of her monotype. And there is the monotype Convected. It's so brilliant in real life. The silver just shines. So I'm so grateful to her. Now, the goings on about town. Next weekend will be the last weekend you can see Mother of the Maid at Prospect Theater. It's really an extraordinary production. So you can attend Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, and then there's a Sunday matinee. Go online to Prospect Theater Project and procure your tickets or call, and you'll be glad you did. It's all about Joan of Arc, her family, their struggle to understand her vision, and it tests the bonds of their relationships and their faith. I think you'll really enjoy it. At the Carnegie Art Center, there's a new exhibition, Valley Focus, works by Deborah Barr and David Oliphant. You can view it in the Ferrari Gallery through March 19th. Provocative, complex, and full of engaging details, these two mixed media artists bring a vibrant energy to the gallery. Visit the Carnegie Art Center Tuesdays through Saturdays, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., and see them for yourself. The Great Valley Museum's first ever rotating art exhibition, Reclaimed Creations, features the works of Sayaka Gantz, and it opens this week. Artist Sayaka Gantz was born in Yokohama, Japan, and later received a BFA from Indiana University, Bloomington. She describes her art style as 3D Impressionism. These sculptures, created with reclaimed materials, depict animals in motion. That sounds fascinating. We have a lot going on around town. Thank you very much for tuning in this week. Next week, our guest will be Al Golub, and he'll be interviewed by David Schrader. So you'll have two photographers talking. Thanks again. This has been Expose Yourself to Art. Have a good afternoon.